we are welcoming more people here, and then I'm gonna take this time to share my screen because I actually do have something that I could share with everyone, just kind of to visually anchor our discussions. Okay, all right. One more person I'd like to just sort of like tee up is my friend and colleague, Teresa Wolf. She is a director of donor strategy and relations at Illuminate. And here's why there's somebody else here, because, you know, of all the questions that I gotten, some I will own up front is not within my wheelhouse at all. Such as, what do you think fundraisers can learn from TV journalists? I don't know. Any advice for starting up a nonprofit? Not really. On and on. But there are some that are right up my alley, such as, what's the best way to tell the most engaging stories to move donors? That is right up my alley. But then today's focus is based on the research report, First Generation Wealth Creator, their relationship with wealth and philanthropy. And here's why it's important to have Teresa Wolf. Teresa, can you wave? Everybody, this is Teresa. She manages the donor analytic process at a company called Illuminate. And full disclosure, I'm a co-founder of that company as well. Because there are questions such as, how can you best identify self-wealth? How can you acquire more major donors? And what would be your recommendation on creating warm strategies to support an effort to engage a larger audience of major gifts donors? Those are all within her wheelhouse, because prior to Illuminate, she also worked for University of Chicago Central Alumni Relations, managing volunteers. So at a university of that size and at that stature of the alumni base and the volunteers, so she brought in a lot of experience to help me answer that questions. So here's why I love this model is that I collect all the questions. I know what I can handle and cannot handle. And then that gives me just enough time to grab an expert to help me answer questions. All right, so again, focus of today is the report. And then you may or may not have seen the feature in the New York Times. Joe Paluzzi is one of the 20 donors I interview, extensive interview, but he's the only one willing to talk, along with a couple of other ones, because it is so hard for this particular segment, very large segment of donors, to review themselves, to tell you a little bit about themselves. And this segment of people is so niche, so small, and yet they control such a large portions of wealth in our country. And we could all use more people like Joe, but then you're very, very, very unlikely going to find a whole lot of people like Joe. So this is the best way to get to other people like Joe. So let's let the questions begin, shall we? All right, so I'm just going to read it off here. I have the impression that there's a loose but growing community of aspiring but underconnected philanthropists. That is potential major individual donors who have set up a donors advice fund and want and need to allocate the funds, but don't have the networks to know about worthy nonprofit recipients. How true is that? How can nonprofits do better at plugging into those networks and providing options, and what kind of special approaches or hand-holding at these duties donors need? It's a big, multi-part, complex questions. So I'll tackle the part that I can tackle. So based on the data that I have read and seen as well as past studies. Okay, my studies, the samples are small, 20. What would be considered bigger would be 40 of qualitative studies. But what is nice is that the findings from my studies are fairly consistent with all the studies that have done in the past. And number one, namely that of all the ultra high net worth individuals in the United States, the range of estimations, right, from 68% to all the way to 80% are first generation wealth creators. And this, I love, 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 love. I don't think I need to share screen here because I don't see your faces. It's very, very annoying. All right. I love, love, love this book called Strangers in Paradise. It's written by James Grudman. And he used a cross-cultural paradigm, cross-cultural psychology to help us understand who are these first-generation wealth creators. Because they are like immigrants. They left their native land and they emigrated into the land of the wealthy. And so they hold on to their middle-class native values, but they're both thrilled, excited, as well as scared and overwhelmed by the fact that they are immigrants. And the people around them in this new land are very foreign to them. And they don't act, behave, nor do they have the same similar values as they do. And yet they want to assimilate. They have different scale of desire of assimilations. And at the same time, they worry about their native children, as well as their grandchildren and their descendants, because they are native. Oftentimes they're born or they migrated while they were young. And so they worry how they can impart their traditional, their native values, while helping their children adjust living and thriving in a land of wealth. And so the wonderful thing about using this model is in answering that question is that these folks have the joy of wealth and everything that wealth can afford them, as well as very unique challenges that those who don't find hard to relate to, as well as fathom. And so I think the spirit of the question is we can dive deeper into Donors Advice Fund, and how do you plug into this network of people where you can be just right there at the right time. Like, of course, that's nice, but I will also encourage you to first try to understand better who they are, what their struggles are. These books are out there, these studies are out there, as well as leveraging what your organizations already have to offer to help them bridge the need, the struggles that they have being first generation wealth creators. Okay, I'll stop there and see. I can actually see chat room right now if there's any follow-up questions to that. Yeah, Wade.
Hi, Esther. That was my question, actually. And I guess my follow-up would be, where do you find those folks? I mean, you might be getting to that later, but I know that there are some people of this description because I've met some of them, and I'm wondering how many more are out there, and are they looking, the ones who are like at a point where they're starting to figure out whether and how to be philanthropists, you know, I think that they're low-hanging fruit in a way, but I'd like to know how to approach them and where to find them. So I don't know if you have any ideas about that.
Yeah, so that's why we have Teresa here. You might have heard of the book Millionaire Next Doors. There are books like, oh, actually I have it right here. This is a great read, Limbo. This predates Hillbilly Elegy. Maybe you've heard of Hillbilly Elegy, the book, as well as the movie. This predates that. Blue Collar Roots, White Collar Dreams. And it's very similar to those who have left their native socioeconomic community and migrated towards a new socioeconomic reality and struggle to reconcile. And so, way to your question is, how do I find them? And once I find them, how do I approach them, right? This is like a central question. I used to teach major gift strategy at Kellogg School of Management 6 years. And that is what everybody else is asking too. Should we just go to that? Because I mean, this is such a great question. This is such a perennial question. This is such a central question. But I think Teresa has a 21st century answer to this century-old questions. So how do you find them, first of all? And then we can talk about, once you find them, how do you approach them? So Teresa?
Thanks, Esther. Can you guys hear me okay? Sorry. Oh, you're right. You can't see folks when we get going. Okay. I can see Rena. So if there's a problem, just let me know. All right. Thanks so much for having me join today. I'm really excited to be here with everybody. This has definitely been a topic that we've been talking a lot about with our clients, as far as prospect identification, new methods, trying to think about, all right, we know folks are out there. We can, as Esther said, you can see the research, but like finding them is the key step. As Esther said, I'm the Director of Donor Strategy and Relations at Illuminate. So my primary role day to day is working with our clients, matching their fundraising goals to actionable next steps using our data services. So Illuminate provides data enrichment, analytics, and insights services for higher education and nonprofit organizations, particularly for fundraising efforts. Our team is made up of philanthropists, fundraisers, storytellers, volunteer managers, and data scientists. And using our backgrounds in the higher education and nonprofit sectors, we strive to bring quality data solutions to our clients. Fundraising, as Esther said, has certainly evolved in the last century and even really quickly in the last decade. So using data and analytics has opened up a lot of new opportunities for this identification and even those first steps of qualification and building that relationship. So a traditional model for finding new prospects was to ask your board, who do they know? Ask your donors, who do they know? And can anybody make an introduction? So similarly, in that same vein, an organization might wait until the constituent notifies them of a recent job change and promotion, or maybe a move to a new house that would sort of tip you off about some expanded wealth. Or even they may come to you and say, you know, I was reading about this initiative you have, and I have more interest than ever in supporting you. So with more data available now than ever before, you really have to think about, okay, how can I have the data work for me? You know, Esther always says, have the story do the work, but I would sort of debate her and say, well, the data can do some of the work as well. So with consumer data being tracked for marketing, so we've all had those personalized emails from Target or Amazon. That's all based on data insights. You're thinking about Zillow and the fact that you can look up home values for most homes on the market, even if they're off market. What did they last sell for? All the publicly available data on housing is now organized with online search engines such as Zillow, and that can be mined and referenced for more insights on your prospects. Social media, everybody is sharing data all the time. So how can we find out from them when there's a job change? Because they may not let you know at your nonprofit, but would be a great match in an interest or in a new role to an initiative you have. So higher education and nonprofit shops alike, large or small, should be maintaining quality data on their prospects and using analytics to create strategic and efficient ways to identify and qualify those new relationships. So Illuminate offers two main service lines, matched and scored. These services support fundraising shops who want to have good quality database, but then also use that data for strategic analytics. So let's talk about matched first. It focuses on what we call data enrichment and identity resolution. So what we're doing here is offering a create your own bundle model where clients can purchase data updates for contact information, like an email, a mobile phone number, an address, or things like employment information, wealth screening indicators, education histories, social media handles, and even interests from social media activity. So we offer over 400 different data fields that clients can pick from. And in addition to finding that data, you have to think about identity resolution. So here at Illuminate, we conduct rigorous quality assurance data matching to ensure a superior level of accuracy. For example, many vendors will take the full name and zip code for your prospects and seek out that updated information. And in thinking about this, I'm pretty sure there's more than one John Smith living in the Chicago zip code of 60647. So you're risking potentially appending new data that belongs to a different person to your prospect's profile. So what we're doing here at Illuminate is using data matching that uses at least 5 different unique other data points to build confidence that the right John Smith is your prospect and your profile, and we're appending quality data. So when thinking about Esther's research and the concept of first generation wealth, or this, stealth wealth, how do you find them? You can use data to help you figure out who has sold their business recently, who's moved up into a leadership C-suite executive position. Maybe that, you see an address update, and by looking at that zip code, you see they've moved from a home or a neighborhood where it's a $250,000 home median value to something more like a $5 million home median value. Those are clues about this new wealth, and it may not be coming out in a traditional screening, but we assist clients with enriching the profiles of their prospects and trying to make sure that we have accurate quality data. So once you have good data, you want to run analytics. So what we're doing with our scored services is using the data from your database, such as giving histories, event participations, volunteer hours, committee roles, like whatever you guys have been tracking. We pair that alongside the wealth screening data, consumer behavior indicators, and other publicly available data, and then put that into our algorithms. The output of Scored is a series of scores and flags. The scores give you a sense of wealth capacity, inclination to your organization, and kind of an overall prospect score. But the flags are there to also think about who's a new prospect to your organization, who might already be philanthropic in the way that they're giving, that they give to other organizations, and also who might make a good planned giving prospect. So each of these flags we customize to what works for the client. And so that way it's action oriented when it comes right back in to your shop, so that it fits into your gift bands, pipelines, and portfolios. So with good analytics, I wanted to share a couple illustrative stories of things that we can do with analytics, just as another way of thinking about it. So client A on the screen needed sort of a hygiene project for their database. It had been almost 10 years since they'd last run a big overhaul and kind of update screening on everything from address to employment to wealth screening. The biggest takeaway from the project is we identified almost 1,000 deceased records that just needed to be inactivated. And so by doing this sort of hygiene project, it really gave them a chance to think about, okay, who are actually expanded new prospects, and taking that data and putting it into action. So another project we worked on was thinking about this idea of who might be a future board member. There's actually a couple projects that we've done this for folks, and thinking about creating that pipeline. So they know they have a profile of people who have fit in their organization to serve on that role, but they don't know who they don't know. So we are able to partner with them, do a full scan of a large data set, use these indicators to generate these scores and flags, and then think about, okay, these are folks that we should start building into a pipeline, building into the relationship. Another project that we worked on was, there was a targeted outreach for, okay, I know I have a large group of snowbirds. We have an alumni base. It was for a school in the Midwest, but they knew that there were hundreds of them in Florida, and they all had second homes. So we wanted to not only run enrichment and try to figure out where these second homes were there neighborhood clusters, were there opportunities of new wealth and people that they didn't know were down there, and then what was the strategy going to be for them for going out and engaging. Right, of course, when we delivered all this, COVID happened, but they were able to use the same data and the output to think about, okay, let's pivot to more of like a planned giving strategy, because while that hadn't been the initial goal going in, for the folks that they had relationships with, we had all flagged a number of them that should be on their planned giving radar and just had never been looked at. So the visual on the left-hand side of the slide represents a client who wanted some guidance on where potential prospects were clustered. We examined their data set and delivered them this visualization with others, but focusing particularly on the southwest side of Chicago. So there were over 200 prospects in that region. And now that they think about post-pandemic engagement, they have a targeted geographic option for where there's a concentration to consider small in-person events. I mean, just knowing that there's going to be this new normal as the vaccine rolls out, not all in-person events are going to go back to just happening right away. And so you're really going to have to think about ways to do virtual event strategies and in person. So a good, strong data scan can help you think about what's the most strategic way to balance my time on meaningful in-person events, maybe based around location, and then even some virtual events based around interest. If you identify you have a lot of people interested in a particular line of trees, we did an arboretum event recently, but there was a particular research around some trees. It's like, well, then that might be a topic to bring a faculty member on and do a virtual event. So. Another outcome that you might have from a data analytics project would be, or sorry, not another outcome, but the outcome is a new list of prospects. But thinking about it in another way, how do you prioritize that list of prospects for qualification for those initial outreach steps? So the chart on the screen represents individuals who are deemed as new or revisit in this particular client's data set. We have segmented them by age group and then plotted them using the overall score that we generate against their lifetime giving to the organization. We would recommend to clients that they start and go from right to left. And let me say that again, because it's the opposite of what you're going to think. It's right to left, so that within each age group, you consider top prospects for a pipeline and how to prioritize your outreach. One of the questions submitted in advance was asking about identifying stealth wealth. And obviously we've heard that here today, this afternoon as well. So a straightforward way to ID a person is through their wealth capacity ratings and net worth. But there are those who seek to hide their assets and routinely will get missed on a traditional wealth screening. So our approach here at Illuminate also looks to build in other indicators into these scores. So if we don't have a traditional household net worth, household income, or home value, or any of those, we're also looking for things such as who has a pilot's license, who owns a boat, who has a CEO or vice president level job at a Fortune 500 company, other executive job titles, luxury credit cards. Are they in a wealthy area of the US by looking at their zip codes? So we've really tried to be creative about, even if someone has hidden a lot of information, if you only have their address and their employment and their email, what could we figure out from those clues, and doing it in a bulk analytics way so that you don't have to sit there and evaluate each prospect one by one. So the last visualization I wanted to show you gets back to something I'm sure all of you are familiar with, but the pyramids. We always talk about pyramids. So we can use our analytics on this bulk, in this bulk approach to consider your organization's pipeline depth and potential. The visual on the screen is one that we delivered for a client that was reviewing a data set of just over 100,000 entities. And looking at the data in this way provided the client and us a chance to take a macro look and see that there was attention needed at the $10,000 to $25,000 pipeline bucket or gift capacity range. And so we were able to then tailor the project and think about the outcomes we needed for how to look at our flags and how to generate active, meaningful leads for new prospects. So just to take a moment and think about stealth wealth again, having regular data processes in place that evaluate your constituents for wealth screening and update these pyramids could lead to identification of some individuals that maybe have come into more of a recent situation of wealth. So ideally, as they move up this pipeline, they're being engaged along the way and they're building a relationship with you. However, it can happen where you're reviewing a list, and if you haven't updated it in 8 to 10 years, like the example I mentioned, you might be getting your list of top 200 prospects and realizing that there's someone in there that has more recently popped up. And as you start to build that out and look at the data to let it inform you a little bit more of like what the context is and what the full profile is, you might find that that is a stealth wealth opportunity for engagement. So just as I wrap up, I wanted to leave you with this visual. The stages on the screen are describing some of the actions you can take when you have strong quality data, data policies and procedures. So with good data, you have greater intelligence and increased opportunities to put together strategic and customized qualification plans. And using the data to make efficient choices about who is in your portfolio allows you to prioritize your time and see more efficient returns. And the more successful you are in your role, the more your organization's mission is successful. So thanks for your time, and thanks, Esther, for the invitation. If there's anything anyone would like to ask, I'm happy to answer questions, and Esther will share my contact information at the end if there's questions or more interest in what Illuminate's doing, if we can help your organization.
Thank you, Teresa. And I think this also answers actually one of the questions that I put under my column, but you've kind of answered it already, but maybe you can supplement it in addition to the data analytics, is that how do we manage a major donor program with a, quote around the word program, with a fundraising staff of one, who also has to do all the other fundraising and grant writing. It is overwhelming for a department of one, but I think there are technologies that can do a lot of the work, heavy lifting for you, so that you can, the key to me is prioritize. Mm-hmm. Everybody only has 168 hours a week. There's one, this is like one great equalizers that we have. There are a lot of inequity in this world, but we all of us only have 168 hours a week. And so when there are things that technologies can do the heavy lifting for us, let it do the work for us, and then save your time to do the work that only humans, at least so far, only humans are able to do, and that is the relationship building and whatnot. But you also manage a huge volunteer programs at University of Chicago. And we all know that so many donors are just former volunteers, right? So can you kind of talk about like, how do you manage that, and how do you work with development staff to think more to do more thoughtful planning in terms of cultivating volunteers and turn them into donors?
Yeah, I can. So I would say that the key is always being donor centric and even prospect centric, right? We've been hearing a lot more about that. And I three things are kind of coming to mind. One is, like I was just telling you guys, let the data drive some of the internal decisions. So if you have a donor, for this particular, what I'm thinking is, it's like if you have an active donor and they're in the prospect of paying off their pledge in the 5 years, they also still may sit on a local regional board and be very involved with the local alumni. And that's where they're getting their, immediate networking and engagement from, even though they're financially also supporting an initiative like a scholarship or something back on campus. And so let the donor be the one to help figure out, okay, who from your organization should start to help manage me? We ran into that a lot because, like Esther said, I was working much more with the volunteers, but if they were either a donor or a major gift prospect, there would be times where I was in touch with them more often than their development officer, mostly because we were planning events on a regular basis. And I think it was important to consider that while maybe the bottom line at the internal level was we want this major gift to come in and we want we need this support, to the donor, it was much more about how are you engaged? How are you feeling like you're connected back to the university? And that was coming through their volunteer participation much more than it was through getting the pledge reminders. And so I think if, as much as you can use data and you can use decision-making strategies that put the donor at the center of the decision, that is much more successful.
Yeah. John and Mike have a question.
Okay.
All right, we'll go to Mike first because I can read his questions. Can analytics provide any insight on lifestyle to allow development staff engage first-generation wealth creator prospects in a more comfortable manner? I really appreciate that question, Mike, because a lot of the ways that I felt like I had been approached was not comfortable. There was this assumption, the one size fit all, the assumptions being you have the capacity, so you must like a certain fanciness, attentiveness, as well as thoughtfulness around the way that you're being approached, when actually my husband and I and a lot of the 20 people I talked to did not care about that. So it's important, right? So how can you glean from the data to get a sense of their lifestyle so that you know the best way to approach them?
That is really interesting. I'm thinking, when you first read the question, my brain actually went in a different direction, Esther, to be totally transparent. I was like, there are all sorts of data indicators out there. Like I mentioned, the luxury credit cards, and you can also just get consumer data on, are they interested in fancy cars? Are they interested in collecting arts? And are they interested I mean, we regularly evaluate different vendors, and I'm not kidding you, there were probably 100 different interest categories on this one I scanned recently, trying to think what could be something tangible to a nonprofit, like what, would this be valuable data? And at some point I wonder if it's a little bit overkill. So like, what is the data that you need to know to do your qualification and to build that relationship? So yes, I think it's out there, but I think that so sorry, my brain is going a little too fast. So in this idea of how much data is the right amount of data, I think you have to know your organization, know your mission, and think about what points do you want to put forward to your potential donors? Because part of it is identifying new prospects, but the ultimate goal is to identify prospects that will tie back to what your mission is and what you're asking for money for too. So like you may have a data list that pops up and says, Warren Buffett's going to give, he's wealthy. It's like, wow, yeah, he is. But is he actually interested in what you are there to fundraise for? And so, these luxury data points and luxury things, they can show you that. But as far as like what the actual interest is, I still come back to the fact that it's got to happen through the storytelling, through the qualification, through the actual talking to them and getting that data pulled back in. Does that help us?
And I think I can supplement that by saying that you have to go out with an assumption based on what you know, based on the homework that you've done. And I think you want to calibrate continuously based on the input that you're getting from the donor. I, for example, have someone who was assigned to me for a number of years. She's very good at what she does. She's really on top of her game. Her communication style, unfortunately, has just been very, to me, over polished. I felt like there's a certain veneer around it, that everything is great, everything is pretty, everything is going to be awesome, 10 out of 10. I just don't believe that. And I'm not expecting anybody to badmouth anyone or anything, but I personally appreciate more. I'm a very informal person. I think that should come across fairly quickly to anyone who meet me right away. And so that I don't feel like there's any sort of recalibration on this particular person's part of sort of trying to meet me somewhere in the middle. So I think the data will kind of land you in the right neighborhood, right? But which house in particular should you be knocking? Then you have to really do a lot of attentive listening, as well as recalibrating based on the input that you're getting from the donors.
I think, yeah, I definitely think of the data more as clues, and you should use data and think about it to be the clues to figure out where to look. We use the concept of bubbling up. So let's bubble up and have new prospects that surface. But ultimately, if those are the clues, when you go and do the first interview, the first conversation, even your first email, like Esther's saying, you have to be willing to pivot and listen and see if the clues line up with what they are actually telling you.
Yep. John, you've been very patient.
So thank you, and wonderful session today, Esther. And I'm going to actually build on the last couple of questions with a specific use case. So for anonymity purposes, I'll lay it out this way. One of the boards I serve on is for a nonprofit that has built out a database, I'll say, of tens of thousands of email addresses collected through its various online engagement programs, obviously a ton in the last year, but going back a couple of years. And in my conversations, as I've recently joined this board, what I'm hearing is all we have is the email address. We don't know anything. And part of me is, okay, I remember, I used to work in technology. I know data privacy and personally identifiable information and, all of those rules. And then part of me knows that if I happen to say to my wife, we're out of toilet paper within earshot of my cell phone, that the next time I pull up a browser on my laptop, there will be an ad for toilet paper right next to whatever I'm looking at. So I kind of go, there's more data out there today than maybe we use. But so if all we have is an email address, so I asked myself kind of two things. A, can we even figure out who's the carbon-based life forms behind those addresses? Who are they? And then B, if we can't do that, or maybe kind of even if we can we infer anything about their interests, like they need toilet paper, that would help us with our outreach to potentially generate more interest with that particular email address?
Yeah, so if I may, I don't know, great question, great specific case questions too. So if all you have is email, even though you have a ton of it, what can be done? And the other thing I think I'm hearing is that it's creepy when it's not used well. Even if you have the world's best data intelligence and analytics. So what's the right balance?
Yeah, I mean, Google knows more about me than I know about me.
Yes, that's true. Teresa, what do you think?
Well, so for the first question, you could do a lot with email address. It's actually one of the primary data points that are used by what I'm just literally going to call data harvesters. That is a Teresa term from what I've observed moving into this world of data science. Email is one of the main unique identifiers to start looking at a profile and figure out if that is your person. So if you just have email addresses, yes, we definitely could work with you to start to put together a profile. I think where it's going to come into play is, as I mentioned, data can provide clues. So if you've got an email address that says johnsmith@gmail.com, well, there is only one John Smith that has that email, but there are many John Smiths that have an email, and like you gotta kind of think about identity resolution, and that's something that we try to do here as like our first and foremost is like, yes, we'll go out and help you, but some of the things that you'd want. So if you have a database and it's just email addresses, you're going to get a lot of results back, and a lot of them will be right, and a lot of them may not be right, because maybe my mom ordered something on my email address and now I'm on that mailing list. My favorite example is I helped my grandma order a CPAP machine piece. So I get marketed now all the time for a CPAP machine, which I don't currently own. And so like people use their email addresses for many different things. So you have to take the results as an opportunity and clues, but you have to do your due diligence as well to see if the profile of the person returned makes sense to if you know anything else about them. If you're on a board, obviously not knowing about your board, but a use case I could think of is if it's a regional arboretum, like I mentioned, we worked with one recently, and a lot of these addresses come back as out of state. I probably wouldn't prioritize those if it comes back with a mailing address on there. I'd probably prioritize the ones that look like they're in the same region that I am, because part of the goal was getting people to that arboretum. So you have to come up with ways, and I say you, but like we do this with you, is to try to think about how you go through and then validate the data and prioritize it so like having the clues really sort of drive the efficiency of it. So you can do a lot with email. But then what does that generate for you? Well, I can think of one vendor. We use like at any given time, there's like a half a dozen vendors that we're active with, because we're trying to make sure we're working with ones that are also looking at quality. And so one of them, if they'll find a match for your email address, and it can provide back to you about 300 different data elements, everything from demographics to interests to things like, are they philanthropic? Are they donors to other different causes? And what are those causes? And this is on top of contact information updates. So you might start with an email address and end up with a mailing address, a cell phone number, and a landline number too. So I think you can really expand out from emails. We definitely have worked with clients that are doing ticketing, right? And so they end up with a lot of email addresses through their ticketing systems. And so part of it also is that they may have those folks in their database. And it's just a matter of identity resolution as well. So like maybe we can use that email address, look it up, and realize that they exist in the other database. In the donor database, they're there, and in the ticketing database. And now we can build out a full profile because we've helped create identity resolution between the three areas. So definitely lots of potential with email addresses, and then expanding that into a bigger profile.
Yeah, you're verifying my inference in that that email address, if they've used it with us, they've used it elsewhere, and somebody somewhere is harvesting that, and then you start connecting, and then you just let the dots kind of, this is where machine learning and AI kick in to let the dots kind of self-connect, and it's a matter of guiding that ecosystem at that point.
Well, and just to like bridge off of something Esther just said, sometimes that can feel creepy when Google pops up toilet paper ads and you're like, I just talked about this. One of our values at Illuminate is literally spelled out as using data for good, because we all believe that like in a fundraising environment, the more you can know about your donor, and not to say go in there and be like, I know everything about you, but like you build that relationship, be a listener. But the more homework you can do on the front end and really come to meet them where they're at and have them, find inspiration in your organization. And if that's a meaningful gift, if data can help do that, that's data for good, in my opinion. And there's other ways that feel less creepy. And so that's really part of what drives.
Yeah, and just to build on and amplify what you're saying is this process of starting with the left rear hubcap from a 47 Mercury, and then inferring what the rest of the car happened to look like, which is essentially what we're trying to do, starting with an email address. You use the technology and you use the data to start the process, not finish the process. It's as Esther said, there's 168 hours a week, or whatever the number was, and so we're going to use our wetware up here as effectively as we can, and we're time constrained, and so we have to figure out where to focus, and so you're verifying my assumption is that, oh, we don't know anything about these people because all we have is their email addresses. No, the reason you don't know anything about these people is because you haven't done anything with the email addresses.
Right.
Yep. And with that, we've burned almost 50 minutes already on this alone, but I think it's very worthwhile because I often tell my students in the major gift programs is that don't go elsewhere. Don't look elsewhere and look longingly. Oh, if only we have that. Oh, if only we have more donors. Oh, if we only have fill in the blanks. There are a lot more in your closets that you can use that have been neglected, that had not been thought through creatively. I tell myself, I tell my team, I tell all my students, first, shop in your own closet and clean through it, look through it, think creatively how things can be further, deeper deployed before you look longingly to elsewheres. I just want to try to answer a couple more questions, if I may, because this one really hits home with me. How do we connect with donors who have been around for years, but we have not built a personal relationship with? Oh my gosh, you have those. That's got to be, before you even go call Teresa, go to these donors first. They've been around. Your organization haven't built a relationship with them, and they're still around. Those are the ones that are asset in your closets that we really need to let them come out, welcome them. And how do you start? Like, since they're kind of been forgotten for a while, they're just kind of like write you a check every year, maybe, or they just sort of been like supporting you all these years. It reminded me of the class because I always assign prep work, and people usually grumble about that because, you know, advanced reading is okay, advanced work somehow is not. But this is an exception. I'd asked my students in that major gift programs to interview at least 2 of their strongest or longest supporters, and I gave them the questions. And then almost always they come back and thank me for assigning advanced work because, and this is what blew my mind, because otherwise they wouldn't have had that conversation. And they learn a lot and they build relationship. And so I don't think you need to have a grandiose reason to reach out, especially even with donors have been around. Just make up an excuse. I need to study for this. Would you mind answering a couple of questions? Careful, well thought out questions, so that I can understand a little bit more about you. Nobody would say no to that. Very few people would say no to that. So you start from there and you learn a little bit more about them and so on and so forth. So I wanted to close with this. We've already covered this. In one of my last sessions at the Major Gift courses, we work on their stories, we hone their stories. I teach them how to build stories over and over again. Actually, I don't need to share this. And then I asked a few of them come out and tell their story. You know, Showtime is a storytelling class after all. And one of the students who was, you know, confident and brave enough to share the stories that she came up with for her organization. It's a veterans organization for helping veterans treating PTSD. And my business partner, my friend, Bob Faley, was there at the class. And I thought, that's great because she can practice in front of a whole group of people. And Bob's dad was a World War II vet. Bob was also, he's also a founding donor of one of the largest veteran museums in the country. Bob has the capacity to give if he were to be interested or at least touched. So she did a great job. She really did a great job. I was moved, you know, from an angle of a storytelling as well as from the receiving end, right? Everybody in class were just moved. After the class, I asked Bob, so what do you think of that story about that veterans organization? He rolled his eyes. I'm not going to tell you which one, but he said, was it even legit? And he asked very good questions because there are a lot of veterans organizations from their praxis, doesn't seem that like it's legit. In fact, it seemed like they are taking advantage of veterans, right? And so here's somebody who has a familiar relationship with our veterans, somebody who had the capacity and has the past history had given to a similar cause, and he was not moved by the story. But the rest of us was. We're giving her a big applause. And so my question to you, and then hopefully answer some of the other questions about how do you come up with a great story or several good stories that would move donors, is that have you field tested it? Okay, have you tested it on the actual audience, closest to the audience, and not just people who love you, who agree with you, who think you're doing great things, which I'm sure you are anyway, but then the real test is, can you use the story that you come up with to move the needles towards the directions that you really needed to go? So, and also, what do we mean by stories? So really quick, because this is right within my wheelhouse, we have like 3 minutes. Most people think of stories as past events. You know, I was born in this town, I went to this schools, and then I had this job, and then I started this company, right? These are all past events that we thought of or refer to as story. And it is important to get to know the donor stories in terms of its past events. But the other way to think of story as is the mental model, as is that something that is rather abstract that exists in their mind that explain how the world works. Okay, it may or may not be the right or reflective of reality, but reality is complex. But then you have to understand that what is their story, what is their mental model in terms of their understanding of wealth, and what is the right way and right pace, and how and through what vehicle to give. That is the mental model that I often don't hear a fundraiser talk about as, yeah, it's important to get to know donor story, but I think they're only referring to mostly as donors' past events. So what we would like to offer is this sort of 3-step process. So to think about it is that understanding wealth, because although a huge percentage, you know, up to 2/3 to 80% of ultra high net worth people are first generation wealth creators, it is a tiny, tiny little populations compared to the 300 million people plus that we have in this country. And it is one of those things that unless it happened to you, it is really hard to understand what life is like. And so I actually think that, yes, data is important, grant writing is important, as well as all the other stuff is important, but it's actually really crucial to think about and understand what is wealth. And then the second thing is that how do you approach them to collect their stories, right? Both in terms of their past events as well as their mental models. Because with first generation wealth creators, only when you truly understand what does wealth mean, especially mean to them, and that you have collected their stories, can you then make the case, make the argument, as well as create the stories of why should they care about you, about your organizations. So start on April 15. This is another free event. I had the pleasure actually of having 2 principal gift donors, Lisa Greer and Jen Riescher, to open up the closet and then lift the hood and let you poke around what it's like to be wealthy and their struggles with it and the experience with philanthropy. And Scott Mordell is the longest serving CEO of Young Presidents Organizations in the history of YPO. He served as CEO for the past 10 years. So he has a huge, long, global view of who are these people. So I have 2 minutes. And usually my typical model, I would be asking any questions before we wrap up, but I think I started with, let's start with your questions. So I feel pretty good. And I know I still have a ton of other questions I haven't answered. So I hope we can keep the conversation going. I plan to have more of these events. So this next one is April 15. Rena, just type in the registration link that you can already register. It is limited, space is limited. So, you know, let us know if we can count on you and see you there.